Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today we're diving into the curious case of Hermione Granger, the embodiment of discipline, fairness, and blatant disregard for the Hogwarts rulebook. She was always the first to raise her hand, could quote the school code by heart, and had zero tolerance for laziness. And yet, paradoxically, it was Hermione, supposedly the most sensible of the trio, who broke the rules the most. So how on earth did she not get expelled by third year? Let's find out. Enjoy the video. Number 1, Poisoned Crab and Goyle. Remember the Chamber of Secrets? Here's Hermione's little list of achievements. Brewing polyjuice potion illegally. Attempting to sneak into another house's common room. And the most fun one, drugging Crab and Goyle by lacing cupcakes to knock them out and steal their hair. This isn't just a breach of school rules, this is almost a criminal offence, and also Harry and Ron could question Malfoy undercover. Number 2, set Snape on fire. During Harry's first Quidditch match, he starts falling off his broom. Hermione suspects Professor Snape is jinxing it. Her solution? Set his robes on fire with a spell, secretly. No, excuse me, Professor, or are you okay? Just a casual arson attack from a first-year student. Welcome to Hogwarts, where attempted murder is apparently part of the curriculum. Number 3, hexed the sign-up sheet. Creating Dumbledore's army was already a school violation, but Hermione took it a step further. She enchanted the sign-up sheet. The result? Any snitch would end up with the word sneak written across their face in boils. At best, that's student-on-student aggression. At worst, a deliberate use of dark magic. Number 4, attacked Neville. The legendary moment from Philosopher's Stone. Hermione petrifies Neville with the spell Petrificus Totalis. Why? Because he tried to stop them from breaking the rules. She could have reasoned with him, could have walked away. Instead, she went straight to combat magic against a classmate in front of friends and absolutely no consequences. Number 5, used Confundus Charm. During the Quidditch Keeper tryouts, Hermione hits Cormac McLaggen with a Confundus Charm just to make him miss a save. Why? So Ron could get the spot. Friendship is a beautiful thing, sure. But casting spells to rig a sports trial, that's not just rule-breaking, that's fraud. Number 6, helped hide Norbert. Hagrid, a full-grown man, decides to raise a dragon in his wooden hut, secretly, illegally. And Hermione? Naturally, she helps. She plans a midnight rooftop rendezvous, arranges dragon delivery logistics, and throws herself into the operation like it's a school project, then has the audacity to look surprised when they lose house points for it. Number 7, let Harry and Ron cheat. Seems harmless, right? But this is where it all begins. Throughout all their school years, Hermione helped her friends deceive teachers, writing their homework, letting them copy answers, feeding them spells they didn't study. And let's be honest, homework exists for a reason, but who needs to open a textbook when you've got Hermione Granger as your personal academic cheat code? Number 8, stole ingredients from Snape's office. Second year, the Chamber of Secrets had been opened. Fear ran through the halls of Hogwarts. Hermione had a theory that Draco Malfoy might be the heir of Slytherin, but to prove it, she needed polyjuice potion, and to brew that potion, she needed rare, restricted ingredients: boomslang skin, lacewing flies, bicorn horn. These were not sold in the student cupboard, they were locked in Professor Snape's private stores. So Hermione broke the law. She didn't just suggest it, she planned it. She sent Harry to distract Snape, while she and Ron broke into the office and stole what they needed. "How do you know what's in his private stores?" Ron asked. "I've looked," she replied. Calm, unapologetic. She wasn't afraid of getting caught. She was only afraid of not having enough time. The cabinet was warded, protected by magic. She found a way in anyway. If Snape had walked in at that moment, the story would have ended differently. He was already suspicious. "You've been stealing from my personal stores," he snapped at Harry weeks later. But he never knew the real culprit. Hermione, the girl who lectured others about rules, had committed burglary. Not for profit, not for revenge, but for a theory, for a hunch. And once again, she walked away untouched but not innocent. Number 9 used the time turner for personal missions. The time turner hung around Hermione's neck like any other necklace, small, shiny, innocent. But it wasn't. It was one of the most dangerous magical objects in the wizarding world, given to her under strict conditions, only to attend multiple classes, nothing more. Professor McGonagall warned her, never use it for anything else, never be seen, never change the past. Hermione agreed, and then broke that promise without hesitation. At the end of 3rd year, Dumbledore looked at her with a quiet suggestion. "You must not be seen," he said. But he knew what he was asking, and Hermione didn't hesitate. She turned time back and set out on a mission, not for homework, not for school, but to change the course of history. She and Harry rescued Buckbeak, freed Sirius Black, interfered with a ministry-ordered execution, and helped a wanted man escape on a stolen creature. It was brave, it was heroic, it was absolutely illegal. The ministry had no idea, no paperwork, no authorization. If the Department of Magical Law Enforcement had found out, Hermione could have faced trial. Tampering with time carries consequences. Terrible things happen to wizards who meddle with time, Ron once said. And he was right. One wrong move and they could have shattered reality, created paradoxes, ended lives. But Hermione didn't blink. She rewrote the future with the calm of someone solving a riddle. She was a 3rd-year student with the power to break time. And she used it. Not to revise notes, not to prepare for exams, but to challenge the ministry's authority and rewrite justice in her own way. Fans called it clever, teachers called it quiet, but the truth? It was rebellion, disguised as kindness. Number 10 organized an illegal Hogsmeade visit. On 3rd year, Harry Potter wasn't allowed to go to Hogsmeade. He didn't have the signed permission slip. The rules were clear. Professor McGonagall had said no. But when Halloween came and the whole school marched off to the village, Harry was left behind, angry, lonely, and tempted. It was Hermione who gave in first. "You could use the invisibility cloak," she whispered, "and the secret passage Fred and George showed you." She didn't just suggest it. She helped him plan it. Hermione, the rule-following prefect-to-be, encouraged Harry to sneak through a hidden tunnel. She knew it ran from under the Whomping Willow to Honeydukes. She knew it had been dug without permission, and she absolutely knew that Harry was breaking school policy by even thinking about it. But she went along with it, stood watch, helped cover for him when teachers asked questions. "He's in the library," she said once, while Harry was really sipping butterbeer in the 3 broomsticks. If he'd been caught, the punishment could have been severe. Detention, loss of house points, possibly expulsion given how serious the security situation was that year. Sirius Black was on the loose after all. But Hermione didn't care. Not that day. She wanted Harry to be happy, to feel normal, to be with his friends. So the girl who once tattled on students for sneaking out after hours now became the mastermind behind a school-breaking escape plan. She didn't even flinch when Harry returned with tales of overhearing Fudge and McGonagall. She listened like a co-conspirator, proud, supportive. It wasn't just a favor. It was a choice, a quiet rebellion from the girl who used to raise her hand before speaking. Because when it came down to rules or friendship, Hermione had made her decision, and Hogsmeade won. Number 11 imprisoned Rita Skeeter in a jar. Hermione found her, a beetle on the windowsill at the Hogwarts hospital wing. Not just any beetle, Rita Skeeter, unregistered, illegal. A full-grown journalist who had been spying on students by transforming into a bug without notifying the ministry. Hermione didn't run to Dumbledore. She didn't call a professor. She scooped the beetle into a glass jar, cast an unbreakable charm, and kept it for weeks. "I've got you," she told Rita, her eyes calm. No shouting, no wand-waving, just quiet control. She discovered Rita's secret during the chaos of the Triwizard Tournament. The journalist had been publishing lies about Harry and digging into Hermione's personal life. "You horrible woman!" Hermione snapped once in the book. But what followed wasn't just anger. It was detention by student. Hermione imprisoned a grown witch and kept her hidden in her dorm room. That alone was a crime. In the wizarding world, magical confinement is strictly regulated. The use of containment charms, especially on humans, or animagi, is reserved for authorized officials. Rita Skeeter may have been a liar and a parasite, but she wasn't convicted, she wasn't tried, she wasn't even warned. Hermione acted as judge, jury, and jailer, and all while attending class as if nothing had happened. Even more disturbing, she used the threat of exposure as blackmail. "You're going to keep your quill out of our lives for a whole year," she said to Rita. "That's not discipline, that's extortion." And yet, no one blinked. Ron called it brilliant. Harry said nothing. But the girl who once gasped at stealing potions' ingredients was now casually holding a woman hostage in a jar on her bedside table with a lid. Number 12 cast an obliviate on her own parents. The living room was quiet when Hermione lifted her wand. Her parents, Wendell and Monica Wilkins, as they would come to believe, were sitting peacefully on the couch. She didn't cry, not then. With a single whisper, obliviate, she erased herself from their minds. She rewrote their memories, made them believe they had no daughter. Then she planted a new story, one that would drive them to move to Australia, far from the war that was about to begin. And she walked away, alone. Wasn't a school rule she broke, it was something deeper. Obliviate is dangerous, permanent in many cases, a charm reserved for trained officials in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. Yet Hermione, just 17, performed it flawlessly, without oversight, without permission. She changed 2 human lives forever. And she never told anyone at Hogwarts, not even McGonagall, because she knew this wasn't something the school could forgive. Her justification was simple. Protection. Voldemort was rising. Muggleborns were being hunted, and Hermione knew her parents would be targets. But in saving them, she took away their agency, their memories, their love for her. All of it vanished in a heartbeat. Later, she admitted it was the hardest decision she'd ever made, but she never said it was wrong. That's the line she walked, between brilliance and coldness. Hermione Granger was the cleverest witch of her age. She followed rules to the letter until they no longer served her purpose. Then, like in this moment, she rewrote the rules, literally rewrote minds. It wasn't just an act of magic. It was an act of power, one that revealed just how far she was willing to go, even if it meant erasing her entire existence from the people who loved her most. Number 13, infiltrated the Ministry using Polyjuice Potion. Hermione Granger stood in the bathroom stall of the Ministry of Magic, shaking slightly as the Polyjuice Potion took hold. Her reflection was no longer her own. She had become Mafalda Hopkirk, a real Ministry employee. Next to her, Ron turned into Reginald Catamole. Harry had taken the face of Runcorn. The plan was reckless, dangerous, and criminal. They had broken into a government building. They had assumed false identities. And Hermione had brewed the potion herself. A process that took a full month and required illegal ingredients. She knew exactly what she was doing. The Ministry at that time was under Voldemort's control, twisted by fear and cruelty. Hermione believed the rules no longer applied. Still, entering with forged identities wasn't just a trick, it was a magical felony. They stunned actual employees, stole their clothes, used deception charms to fool security measures. They passed through enchanted checkpoints that were meant to protect the entire magical population. If caught, they wouldn't have been expelled from school, they would have been sentenced to Azkaban. Inside the building, Hermione had to act like Mafalda. She had to speak with other witches, fake her way through conversations, lie, smile, nod. And when she saw Umbridge wearing the locket, the very Horcrux they were searching for, Hermione didn't hesitate. She stunned a superior officer and ran. "She's got it!" she yelled to Harry and Ron. All hell broke loose. They fought their way out, injured a number of ministry workers, and escaped using magic in the middle of the atrium. Hermione never looked back. No apology, no regret. She had made her choice. And it wasn't the choice of a student. It was the choice of a soldier. But in doing so, she shattered every magical law she once quoted from memory. The same girl who once refused to steal from a professor's office now stunned employees of the magical government. And somehow it all made sense to her. Because in Hermione's world, when the stakes are high, the rules can burn. Number 14 let Harry use Sectum Sempra. Harry trusted the half-blood prince. The margins of that old potions book were filled with strange spells, crossed-out instructions, and cryptic notes like, "For enemies." It fascinated him. It also worried Hermione. She had read the same pages, she had seen the same handwriting, and yet she never took that book away from him, not even when it started to teach him magic meant for violence. When Harry cast Sectum Sempra on Draco Malfoy, the result was brutal. Blood burst from Draco's chest. He collapsed in the bathroom, screaming. Snape stormed in, his eyes wild, and healed the wounds without a word to Harry. Hermione, hearing about it later, said sharply, "I told you not to use spells when you don't know what they do." But that wasn't true. She hadn't told him anything, not about that spell, not when it mattered. Hermione Granger was always the first to raise her hand. She followed rules until it suited her to break them. She had scolded Harry for using the Marauder's map. She panicked when he took a broomstick from a stranger, but the prince's book, she let him keep it. Why? Because she was curious too? Or maybe because deep down she didn't know what to do when knowledge came wrapped in darkness. The moment Sectum Sempra carved into Draco's body, something shifted. It wasn't just a spell gone wrong. It was a test Harry failed, but Hermione failed too. She was the one who knew better. She read ahead, she read everything, and she stayed quiet when a page whispered, "Blood." Number 15 threatened the school prefect. In the flickering candlelight of Hogwarts' room of requirement, secrecy and defiance intertwined. The air was thick with the scent of rebellion as Harry, Ron, and Hermione gathered students to prepare for battles no teacher would dare authorize. This was Dumbledore's army, an illegal assembly under the tyrannical rule of Dolores Umbridge, who had turned Hogwarts into a bureaucratic nightmare. While their goal was noble, their methods, especially Hermione Granger's, danced dangerously close to the dark edges of morality. For a girl praised endlessly for her loyalty to rules, Hermione had, in this moment, decided that justice justified cruelty. It wasn't the first time she bent the rules, but it was perhaps the first time she openly threatened violent retribution to ensure silence. The threat wasn't abstract, it wasn't empty, it was real, it was prepared, and it was magical. The infamous moment came when Hermione enchanted the parchment used to sign the DA's agreement, a spell so vicious in its execution that it etched the word "sneak" in boiling welts across Marietta Edgecombe's face when she betrayed them. It was a punishment not decided by any authority, not even by Dumbledore, but by Hermione herself, acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Yet what few remember is how Hermione framed this threat before anyone had even betrayed the group. It was subtle, calculated, and deeply disturbing. When Percy Weasley, newly appointed as a prefect, aligned himself with Umbridge's order, he naturally began treating all forms of resistance as dangerous and irresponsible. He did what he believed prefects were meant to do, enforce rules, but Hermione, in a moment that revealed her capacity for manipulative strategy, warned the group that if anyone even considered reporting the DA to Umbridge, they would regret it. This wasn't a rhetorical flourish, it was a warning drenched in magical consequence. Hermione didn't merely express disappointment in potential traitors, she made it clear they would suffer. "You might have noticed," she said coolly, "that we all signed our names when we joined. I've made it so that if anyone betrays us, well, let's just say they'll find out what I mean." This was a chilling moment, not simply for the curse she had laid upon the parchment, but for the self-assurance with which she delivered it. It was a calculated breach of every moral code she supposedly championed. And it wasn't delivered in panic or anger, it was stated with perfect control. In that moment, Hermione Granger weaponized her intellect. The DA members, many of them younger, looked up to Hermione. She wasn't just a brilliant student, she was a moral compass, the girl who refused to break rules unless it was absolutely necessary. But now, here she was, casually revealing that she had enchanted the very symbol of their trust, the sign-up list, to serve as a magical trap. The spell wasn't reversible, it wasn't painless, and it was entirely secret. The ones who signed had no knowledge of what would happen if they broke the oath. In any other context, such a magical contract would have been viewed as coercive, bordering on the unlawful. Percy Weasley, meanwhile, had become a figure of control and regulation. Though unpopular, he never used magic to threaten others into submission. He used words, structure, and official authority. And while Percy's alignment with Umbridge made him detestable in the eyes of his family and peers, he never crossed the line into cruelty. Hermione, on the other hand, crossed that line quietly, elegantly, and without remorse. The real tragedy lies in how easily the student body accepted it, how quickly they normalized the use of magical punishment to protect their cause. Marietta Edgecombe's betrayal is often discussed with contempt, but rarely with compassion. She was a young girl under immense pressure from her mother, who worked at the Ministry of Magic. Her decision to reveal the DA's existence was not motivated by malice, but by fear, and for that she paid a painful price. Her face, permanently scarred with the word "sneak," became a reminder of Hermione's warning. Now fully realized, the punishment was designed not just to mark, but to humiliate. It was not just a spell, it was a sentence handed down without trial. In all of this, one must wonder, was Percy truly the villain? Or was he simply the scapegoat for the fear and anger felt by students who saw in him the face of a regime they hated? He followed rules, yes, but he didn't create them. Hermione, however, bypassed the rules altogether. She created her own system of justice, cloaked in noble intent, but enforced with irreversible cruelty. For someone so obsessed with fairness, her method lacked mercy. And the fact that she never apologized for it, never even questioned its ethics, reveals a darker layer beneath the surface of the brightest witch of her age. The contrast between Percy and Hermione is more than ideological, it is philosophical. Percy believed in the system, flawed as it was. He believed order would prevail. Hermione, in this rare moment, decided the system was broken and that she would be the one to fix it, not by replacing it with something better, but by quietly instituting her own brand of fear-based loyalty. This was not rebellion, it was control by other means, and it was effective. No other student dared betray the DA again. Harry himself seemed unsettled when he learned about the curse on the parchment. But he didn't object, he didn't stop her. Why? Because the ends justified the means. They needed secrecy, and Hermione provided it. But in doing so, she blurred the line between protection and punishment. She became what she despised, an enforcer of fear. While Umbridge used physical pain and threats, Hermione used magical branding, and in doing so proved that even heroes can act like villains under the right conditions. Number 16. Attacked a teacher based on assumptions. It was the night of the Quidditch match, a moment of excitement and tension for every first-year student. But what happened in the stands that evening revealed something far more serious than Gryffindor versus Slytherin. While Harry soared through the air on his broom, something invisible seized control. His broomstick jerked and twitched like a living thing, as if possessed by dark magic. In the crowd, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, and Neville Longbottom watched in horror. Panic set in and assumptions sparked like wildfire. But what followed was not just impulsive, it was a dangerous breach of magical ethics and school discipline. Hermione Jean Granger, the same girl who once said, "We could all have been killed, or worse, expelled," chose in that moment to ignore every rule she claimed to uphold. Hermione's decision was not based on investigation, evidence, or logic. It was pure belief. Belief in the version of events as told by Harry and Ron. When Ron whispered that Professor Snape was staring at Harry and muttering under his breath, Hermione didn't pause to consider alternatives. She didn't ask herself what a professor might be doing at a Quidditch match, watching intently, possibly even trying to help. Instead, she assumed the worst, and, more critically, she acted on that assumption with immediate force. She slipped away from the stands, snuck beneath the seating, and cast a spell directly at a Hogwarts. Professor. The result, Severus Snape's robes caught fire. Harry's broom had started to roll over and over, with him only just managing to hold on. It was definitely being jinxed, the book states. Hermione didn't even stop to think. She snatched Ron's wand out of his hand and whispered, "Incendio." This wasn't just a prank or a mild transgression. This was a full-on magical attack against a teacher, a powerful, qualified adult wizard, carried out by an 11-year-old child with no authority and no confirmation of guilt. In any real-world academic institution, magical or not, such behavior would not have gone without severe consequences. Even more troubling is the context. Hermione was, at this point, still a girl who lived by the book. She chastised others for breaking rules and refused to join in mischief without good reason. Yet here, under pressure, she abandoned that moral high ground. She didn't report suspicions to Professor McGonagall. She didn't speak to Dumbledore or Madam Hooch. She took the law into her own hands. Or, more precisely, her wand. The irony of this is staggering. Hermione, who viewed rule-breaking as practically criminal, became the most reckless of them all. Professor Snape's reaction, as described in the text, was one of confusion and fury. His robes had burst into flames in front of a full stadium. The narrative never shows him lashing out inappropriately. He extinguishes the fire and storms away. If anything, he demonstrated far more restraint than most adults would under similar circumstances. But what's never addressed is this. Why was there no formal disciplinary hearing for Hermione? Why was she not suspended, questioned by the headmaster, or at least given detention? A student used a combative spell on a teacher during a public event. This is not a matter of house points. It is a matter of magical assault. The ethical implications stretch beyond Hermione herself. It calls into question the standards of Hogwarts as an institution. Is Gryffindor privilege so deeply embedded in the school culture that even flagrant acts of aggression are brushed aside if they come from the right students? Would a Slytherin first year have received the same leniency if they had hexed Professor Flitwick or Professor Sprout? Highly unlikely. The favoritism is subtle but present, especially when the story is told through the eyes of Harry Potter. From a narrative perspective, it is easy to overlook this incident. The reader is encouraged to distrust Snape. He is described with oily hair, a hooked nose, and a sneering disposition. The writing style primes the reader to suspect him, to dislike him, and ultimately to accept Hermione's actions as justified, even heroic. But strip away the bias and what remains is deeply disturbing. A child misuses magic, an adult is harmed, and the narrative moves on as if nothing grave has occurred. The event also highlights the groupthink mentality that begins to emerge within the trio. Harry, Ron, and Hermione form a tight alliance early in their first year. Their decisions often stem not from wisdom or planning, but from shared emotion and instinct. In this case, it was fear and suspicion. But Hermione's choice to commit a magical attack demonstrates how loyalty, even among friends, can cloud better judgment. Her belief in Harry's account led her to violate school laws and magical protocol. This wasn't just poor decision-making, it was a total collapse of the very values she claimed to hold. What makes this even more alarming is that the action was premeditated. Hermione didn't act in self-defense or in the heat of a duel. She sneaked down the stands, took aim at a professor, and cast a spell. Blue flames shot out of her wand, and Snape's robes caught fire, the narration explains. The intent was clear: cause a disruption. She did not attempt to stop the match or alert a responsible adult. She went straight to offensive magic. This isn't just youthful impulsiveness, it is an abuse of magical ability by someone who should have known better. Number 17, illegally enchanted her own handbag. Hermione Granger was never a rule-breaker by nature. She clung to order and authority like a lifeline in a world constantly on the brink of chaos. But there was one moment when her ironclad respect for rules bent under the weight of necessity, and she committed a violation so severe that, under different circumstances, it might have warranted serious investigation by the Ministry of Magic. Her enchanted beaded handbag, small and elegant on the outside, but vast and bottomless on the inside, became a silent but potent symbol of her willingness to cross a line. She didn't just use advanced magic, she used a category of spells tightly regulated by magical law, spells known to distort space and potentially threaten the fabric of magical stability. Expansion charms, especially when placed on personal items, were no trivial matter. The charm itself was not banned, but it was legally restricted to adult witches and wizards working under ministry supervision. What Hermione did wasn't a clever trick, it was illegal. This transgression happened in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the darkest book of the series, where the trio's survival often depended on unconventional thinking. But even within the lawlessness of war, Hermione's act stands out. She cast an extension charm on her handbag, an item she carried everywhere. "Undetectable extension charm," she had said nonchalantly. And yet, for anyone versed in magical legislation, this casual phrase sent alarm bells ringing. This wasn't an everyday summoning spell or a silencing charm. It was the manipulation of magical dimensions. According to magical law enforcement guidelines for underage sorcery, such charms must be registered and inspected by a certified enchantment supervisor. Hermione had neither approval nor oversight. Her bag wasn't just marginally enlarged, it contained an impossible amount of objects: tents, books, clothing, food, a portrait, healing potions, and more. Hermione had, essentially, created a portable, untraceable vault that could be carried unnoticed into any building, town, or border. This alone would raise the eyebrows of any law-abiding witch or wizard. But the larger concern lies in the charm's unstable nature when performed incorrectly. In Magical Catastrophes and How to Avoid Them, the author Wilbert Slinkard warns: expansion. Charms, when cast improperly or by immature spellcasters, risk causing tears in magical space or collapsing the object entirely. It's the magical equivalent of opening a black hole in your handbag. And Hermione knew it. She would have read every line in the relevant textbooks, she always did. The danger wasn't a surprise to her, it was a calculated risk. And this is what makes the incident so morally complex. Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, knowingly broke one of the strictest magical restrictions placed on minors. She wasn't acting out of ignorance or recklessness. She did it because she believed the survival of her friends depended on it. And she was right. But the legality remains murky. Was it justifiable because they were fugitives? Because Voldemort had seized the ministry? These are the grey areas in which war operates. But even in war, magical law doesn't simply vanish. The most striking part is how normalized the bag becomes. Harry and Ron never question it. They pull out books and tents from its depths like it's the most natural thing in the world. But that normalization is deceptive. The bag is an object of deep magical complexity, perhaps even danger. In one instance, Hermione retrieves a 12-foot from the depths of the bag as though she were reaching for a handkerchief. To the reader, it feels whimsical, but in reality it should have sparked concern. The tense presence inside a handbag defies physical laws. If mishandled, the object might have ruptured from the inside or worse, destabilized its own enchantments, releasing everything into a singular magical implosion. What makes Hermione's act even more significant is the precedent it sets. If a talented underage witch can enchant a bag like that without consequence, what stops a less ethical wizard from doing the same for darker purposes? The same spell could be used to smuggle contraband, to hide cursed objects, or to bypass security wards. That's why the Department of Magical Transportation and the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes jointly monitor all enchanted containers. Hermione, by skirting this regulation, not only endangered herself and her friends, but theoretically made possible the misuse of magical containers by others. Her spell worked perfectly, yes, but the law exists for the ones who get it wrong. There's also the matter of magical traceability. Underage wizards are monitored by the Ministry through the trace, a magical signature that detects illicit spellcasting. The trace is lifted upon turning 17, but Hermione was just past this threshold when she enchanted her bag. Still, the magic was done in secret, without oversight. And according to Hogwarts, a history, even adult magic is subject to rules, especially when the magic involves space-altering spells. The question is not whether Hermione had the ability, but whether she had the legal right. Her knowledge and intentions were flawless, but intentions don't change the law. Interestingly, the bag's enchantment is never addressed as a serious breach. No adult scolds her, no Ministry official investigates her spell work. The trio simply carries on, with the bag functioning as their lifeline throughout their journey. It becomes their mobile home, their library, their survival kit. But beneath that convenience lies the quiet hum of rule-breaking. It's a reminder that even the most upright characters are willing to blur the lines when the stakes are high. Hermione's moral compass didn't break, it adapted. She broke the law not for selfish gain but for survival, and yet that doesn't erase the fact that she broke it. Number 18 secretly kept a potentially dangerous pet. In her 4th year at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger crossed a line few ever expected of her. Known for her unwavering loyalty to rules, her reverence for Hogwarts' code of conduct, and her deep respect for magical law, Hermione was the last person anyone would suspect of endangering her fellow students. And yet, hidden behind the curtain of her dormitory in Gryffindor Tower, a secret scratched its claws against the edge of legality. This secret was known simply as Crookshanks. But by the time of the Triwizard Tournament, he had grown into something altogether different, something not quite cat and not quite safe. Crookshanks had always been peculiar. From the moment Hermione bought him at the magical menagerie, he displayed uncanny intelligence and behavior far too deliberate for an ordinary pet. He could sniff out lies, seemed to understand complex conversations, and pursued the supposed animagus Peter Pettigrew with terrifying precision. Sirius Black once remarked that Crookshanks was the most intelligent cat he'd ever met. But even this odd behavior did not prepare anyone for what he would become, or what Hermione would conceal. During 4th year, something about Crookshanks began to change. He grew larger, and his eyes took on a strange golden hue, flickering with awareness that was deeply unsettling. His claws became sharper, so much so that Neville Longbottom once suffered a long gash on his ankle, claiming Crookshanks had leapt at him for no reason. Parvati Patil complained that the creature had shredded 3 of her scarves, and Seamus Finnegan swore he saw it leap from the top bunk without making a sound. Crookshanks was no longer just a clever cat. He was becoming something else, something Hermione refused to talk about. Hermione's growing silence only deepened the mystery. She began spending more time alone with Crookshanks, brushing him carefully, whispering into his ears, and even skipping meals to stay in the common room with him. The girls in the dormitory noted how Hermione cast frequent privacy charms around her 4-poster bed. Lavender Brown once asked her directly if everything was all right, and Hermione only replied curtly, "Mind your own business." This behavior was not just unusual, it was dangerous. Hogwarts had rules about magical creatures, especially those that might pose a threat to students. Hagrid's hippogriff incident had proven how quickly things could spiral out of control. Yet Hermione kept him hidden, even as he changed. According to Hogwarts safety guidelines, any creature displaying signs of advanced magical mutation or transformation must be reported to the care of magical creatures professor, in this case Hagrid. But Hermione did not report Crookshanks. She protected him. And perhaps she had her reasons. Crookshanks had helped save Sirius Black's life. He had exposed Peter Pettigrew. Hermione trusted him. But what she didn't seem to grasp was that protecting a creature potentially undergoing magical evolution was more than just reckless. It was illegal. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures has strict mandates. Clause 17b, for example, specifically prohibits the unregistered harboring of any magical beast, particularly those capable of intelligence and transformation. While Crookshanks had never been registered as anything more than a half-Kneazle, several fan theories suggest that he was, in fact, something far more complex, perhaps even a transformed wizard. Notably, some believe he was once an animagus, a wizard who had either forgotten his original form or chosen to remain trapped within his feline shell. Others propose he was a failed transfiguration experiment. Whatever the truth, by fourth year, Hermione's Crookshanks no longer fit any safe category of pet. It was during the Yule Ball that the most striking incident occurred. Hermione appeared with Victor Crumb, but Crookshanks, who had never liked strangers, reacted violently in the common room earlier that day. Ron Weasley found his dress robes shredded, his trunk scratched open. He blamed Hermione's cat, and though she denied it, the claw marks seemed to support his claim. "I don't think that thing's even a cat anymore," Ron muttered under his breath. Hermione, uncharacteristically cold, simply glared at him and walked away. The deeper truth is far more unsettling. Crookshanks may not have been just a cat, and Hermione may have known that all along. If Crookshanks was more than he appeared, if he was, as some claim, a transformed animagus, then Hermione was guilty of harboring a magical being capable of independent thought and decision-making. This goes far beyond the bounds of school rule-breaking. According to the laws of the International Confederation of Wizards, the concealment of an intelligent magical being without proper registration or documentation is a violation punishable by expulsion, wand confiscation, and even trial in the Wizengamot under Article 4 of the Magical Beings Act. In essence, Hermione committed a serious magical crime. There is another layer to this story that makes it even more troubling. At the same time Hermione was hiding Crookshanks, she was also heavily involved in the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, SPEW, advocating for magical creature rights and ethical treatment. The irony is chilling. While fighting for the freedom of house elves, she may have been secretly imprisoning a sentient creature in the form of a cat. If Crookshanks was an animagus, then he was not a pet, he was a prisoner. Did Hermione ever consider that possibility? Some fan researchers have traced magical energy signatures, as described in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, that match Crookshanks's behavior to known animagi energy fluctuations. This would explain his erratic actions, nocturnal prowling, and unprovoked aggression toward certain students. It would also suggest that Hermione, who had access to advanced magical literature, might have been aware of what was happening. Perhaps she believed she was protecting him, but at what cost? There is a quote in The Goblet of Fire that now reads with disturbing clarity. When Hermione is asked about Crookshanks acting strangely, she snaps, "He's just being cautious. There's a lot of dangerous things at Hogwarts right now." But maybe Crookshanks was the danger, and maybe Hermione knew that too well. In retrospect, this incident casts Hermione in a complicated light. Her passion for justice, her defense of the marginalized, her hatred for prejudice, all noble traits, But in this instance, she chose secrecy over safety, emotion over reason, and loyalty to one creature over responsibility to an entire school. The Hermione who tattled on students for rule-breaking, who upheld educational decrees, who chastised Harry and Ron for their disregard of protocol, became someone else. Entirely when Crookshanks was involved, she became a protector of a secret that should never have been hidden. What's most unsettling is how this event was never addressed. Dumbledore, known for his far-reaching gaze and deep understanding of Hogwarts' every corner, never commented on Crookshanks. Was he unaware? Or did he allow it, as he allowed so many dangerous things to persist within the walls of the school? The answer may lie buried in Hogwarts' overlooked corners, among the dusty scrolls of forgotten magical cases. Hermione's actions in her 4th year, while never openly condemned, should be remembered as a turning point. They marked the first time she deliberately and methodically chose to break a magical law, not out of necessity, but out of personal attachment. And in doing so, she stepped into dangerous territory. She proved that even the brightest witch of her age could falter, especially when blinded by her own beliefs. Crookshanks was not just a companion, he was a mystery Hermione tried to keep buried. Perhaps the truth of Crookshanks will never be fully known, but the implications of what Hermione did remain. She kept a potentially dangerous creature within school grounds. She denied its transformation, she concealed its intelligence, and she silenced anyone who asked too many questions. If that is not a gross violation of magical law, then what is? Ultimately, Hermione's 4th year stands as one of quiet contradiction. While she fought for creature rights in public, she hid one in private. While she upheld rules in class, she broke them in secret. And while she remained the symbol of order for her peers, beneath her bed purred something ancient, sharp, and not entirely safe. Crookshanks was more than a cat, and Hermione Granger, in those shadowed Gryffindor nights, was more than just a rule-abiding student. She was a keeper of a secret that perhaps should have never been kept. Number 19 threatened a teacher with magic, and it wasn't Snape. In her 5th year at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger reached a breaking point. For years, she had been the voice of reason, the rule follower, the model student, who even went as far as turning in her best friends for sneaking around school. But something shifted in her during the events of Order of the Phoenix. When Dolores Umbridge rose to power as the Hogwarts High Inquisitor and began her campaign of cruelty and oppression, Hermione's loyalty to school rules crumbled, and her sense of justice took on a darker, more tactical edge. The moment that revealed just how far she was willing to go came not in the form of a protest or a clever retort, but in the calculated entrapment of a professor she knew wouldn't walk away unscathed. Hermione was always brilliant, but brilliance becomes dangerous when fueled by righteous anger. Throughout that 5th year, she had watched Umbridge dismantle everything Hogwarts stood for, silencing teachers, banning books, torturing students, and punishing dissent with a sadistic smile. Even the ever-patient Professor McGonagall had reached her limit, but while many resisted with small acts of defiance, Hermione chose a different path. It wasn't a prank or a childish rebellion. It was a plan, sharp, deliberate, and designed to humiliate and endanger. The Forbidden Forest had always been a place of mystery and dread. Hermione, more than anyone, understood the risks. She had read every book she could get her hands on, including Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. She knew what lived among those ancient trees. She knew about the acromantulas, the centaurs, the unknown, and yet when the moment came, she led Umbridge straight into the heart of it, pretending she and Harry were hiding a secret weapon for Dumbledore. She weaponized Umbridge's paranoia and thirst for control, dangling a fabricated story that the toad-like professor couldn't resist chasing. As they marched into the forest, Hermione played her part with precision, pretending to be terrified and desperate. Harry followed, equally unsure of where this would lead. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" he had asked earlier, his doubts clear. But Hermione pressed forward, her eyes focused, her mind set. This was not the same girl who once burst into tears after losing house points in first year. This was someone who had seen the face of tyranny and decided it was time for consequences. When the centaurs appeared, they were not friendly. Hermione had to know they wouldn't be. Firenze, the outcast centaur who had taken up the role of divination teacher, had warned them all of his brethren's anger. The centaurs hated humans meddling in their territory. They especially despised being treated like beasts. Dolores Umbridge, of course, did exactly that. Filthy half-breeds, she called them, her wand trembling in her hand. She tried to assert authority. She tried to command, but in the forest she had no power. The centaurs took her, dragged her screaming into the darkness. What happened after that is left to the reader's imagination, though J.K. Rowling later implied that they did nothing too bad. Still, the fear in Umbridge's eyes, the helplessness in her voice, made it clear this was a punishment, a humiliation, a brutal lesson, and Hermione had orchestrated it all, not by accident, not in the heat of the moment, but through a careful, strategic lie. She knew they'd hate her, Ron later said. She knew exactly what she was doing. Hermione's actions in that scene blurred the lines between heroism and vengeance. She didn't cast a single spell, she didn't strike anyone, but she manipulated the situation so perfectly that her enemy was swallowed whole. No wand needed, just knowledge, cunning, and an unshakable will to protect what mattered. It was a Slytherin move, cloaked in Gryffindor boldness. And what's more striking is that Hermione never showed remorse. She didn't apologize. She didn't confess to a moment of uncertainty. In fact, after the dust settled, she almost seemed proud. It was one of the rare times we saw her operate outside the boundaries of legality and morality. The girl who once cried over a detention was now luring teachers into magical woods, leaving their fates to wild creatures with their own codes of justice. This wasn't like when she attacked Rita Skeeter. That too was morally questionable, keeping an unregistered animagus locked in a jar for weeks. But that was personal and secretive. What happened in the Forbidden Forest was different. It was public. It was dangerous. And it revealed something chilling. Hermione Granger, when pushed to the edge, could be ruthless. She didn't need brute strength. Her greatest weapon was always her mind. And now she had begun using it like a sword. One could argue that Hermione didn't mean for Umbridge to suffer, that she hoped the centaurs would only frighten her. But that argument falls apart when you examine the setup. Hermione chose the forest. She chose to bring up the centaurs in front of Umbridge. She chose to provoke the situation. Even if she didn't know exactly how it would end, she knew it would be ugly. And she did it anyway. It's also important to note that Hermione didn't involve Dumbledore or McGonagall. This wasn't an appeal to authority. It was a cold, isolated decision. She didn't seek approval, didn't ask for help. That kind of autonomy is admirable in one sense, but it also hints at a growing distance between Hermione and the institution she once held sacred. By year 5, she no longer trusted the system to deliver justice, so she made her own. And that makes this moment one of the most significant character shifts in the series, because it wasn't Harry or Ron who took the darkest step in their fight against tyranny. It was Hermione, the same Hermione who had spent years rolling her eyes at rule breakers and insisting on doing things the proper way. Something broke inside her during Umbridge's reign, and she rebuilt herself into someone harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. There is a line in the book that perfectly captures her transformation. When Umbridge screams for help as she's dragged away, Hermione watches in silence. Later, she offers no comment, no regret, just a firm understanding that what had to be done had been done. She brought it on herself, is the unspoken verdict. And perhaps that's true, but it's also true that Hermione made it happen. This moment raises uncomfortable questions. If Hermione, the moral compass of the trio, could become capable of such calculated cruelty. What does that say about the others? Or about the nature of war itself? When the enemy becomes cruel, must we respond in kind? Is there a point where resistance turns into vengeance? These are the questions Hermione's actions force us to confront. And in the grand arc of her story, it's a turning point. Not just because it marks the first time she uses deception as a weapon, but because it marks the first time she abandons the ideals she once clung to so fiercely. It's the moment when Hermione stops being a student and becomes something else entirely. A revolutionary, a strategist, a young woman who knows that sometimes to defeat evil you have to become a little dangerous yourself. She never got detention for it, no reprimand, no consequences. In fact, no adult ever found out. But we, the readers, did. And we watched as Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, stepped into the moral grey. Not because she wanted to, but because someone had to. And if we ever doubted what she was capable of, that moment in the forest silenced all doubts. Because once Hermione decides you're dangerous, you're already finished. Whether you're a Death Eater or a Ministry pawn, the forest is always there, and even the centaurs can't save you from what's coming. Number 20 forged her own documents. In the shadowed corridors of the Ministry of Magic, where fear and suspicion lurked behind every office door, a remarkable transformation took place, one that would forever alter the way we viewed Hermione Granger. Known to most as the brilliant, rule-abiding student who once threatened to report Harry and Ron for being out of bed after curfew, Hermione had crossed a boundary that few could have predicted. In the 7th book of the Harry Potter series, The Deathly Hallows, she forged government documents and impersonated a ministry employee. This wasn't a prank, nor an innocent mistake. It was a calculated, dangerous breach of the law, committed by the same girl who once trembled at the thought of breaking school rules. As the trio embarked on their mission to locate and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, they found themselves spiraling deeper into a world where laws no longer protected the innocent, and where moral choices became increasingly blurred. Their plan to infiltrate the Ministry of Magic demanded not just bravery, but deception. In order to gain access to the heart of a totalitarian regime, Hermione brewed Polyjuice Potion and prepared fake identification for herself, Ron, and Harry. But what many forget or choose to is that Hermione herself crafted the false ministry credentials. Not as a last-minute necessity, but as a deliberate step in their infiltration. The identities they assumed were real people. Hermione became Mafalda Hopkirk, a secretary in the improper use of magic office. This wasn't a simple case of disguise. Hermione forged documents with names, titles, and access rights. She manipulated the system with the precision of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. And though the ministry had by then fallen under Death Eater control, the act of document forgery remains a major ethical departure from everything Hermione once stood for. This was the same girl who refused to cheat on a simple test and reported others for copying homework. But here she was creating fraudulent documents to impersonate a government employee. In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes, Hermione pulled a sheaf of papers from inside her beaded bag and handed them to Ron and Harry. These are our passes. I've made up names and backstories for all of us. The moment is delivered without fanfare, almost as if such an act were just another item on their long checklist of rebellion. But it is anything but ordinary. These weren't just costumes and aliases. They were complete fabrications, entire lives invented to slip past security and surveillance. It was not a childish prank or harmless schoolboy mischief. It was fraud, executed with cold determination. This event represents a quiet but profound shift in Hermione's character. The girl who once sobbed over breaking school rules to protect an innocent hippogriff was now willing to commit federal crimes for the greater good. It's easy to forget that in the wizarding world, the Ministry of Magic is the ultimate authority. Forging documents to gain access to it, even if it has been overtaken by a regime of terror, is a serious offense. And Hermione didn't hesitate. She planned the operation, collected intelligence, and used her own wand to enchant the false documents. The action is reminiscent of tactics used by underground resistance fighters in wartime, but this wasn't World War II, it was the world of wizardry, where the stakes were no less dire but the laws still existed. Hermione did not simply break the rules of Hogwarts, she violated core tenets of magical law. And she did so with chilling efficiency. There is a moment when the trio enters the ministry, and Hermione, as Mafalda, must speak with another employee. Her nervousness is palpable, but so is her ability to stay in character. She doesn't stutter or falter. She plays her part because she knows that one mistake could cost them their lives. It's worth noting that this was not the first time Hermione had used forgery to her advantage. In the Goblet of Fire, she helped Harry cheat the age line set by Dumbledore to prevent underage students from entering the Triwizard Tournament. But that was a school rule. Bending it was cheeky, not criminal. The forgeries in the Deathly Hallows are of a different caliber entirely. They mirror the behavior of figures in the Fantastic Beasts series, particularly the dark manipulations of Grindelwald's supporters. And yet these actions were not born of ambition or cruelty, but desperation and a fierce commitment to justice. Hermione's internal struggle is never fully explored in the text, but it's clear that she made peace with her actions long before executing the plan. The moment she handed Harry and Ron their fake passes, the transformation was complete. She was no longer the bright-eyed prefect who clung to the rulebook like a lifeline. She was a soldier in a war she never asked for but accepted anyway, and in that war the boundaries between right and wrong blurred to near extinction. The irony is sharp. The very ministry she infiltrated had once sent her letters for minor infractions. Now she was violating its most sacred protocols, using the skills she honed at Hogwarts for something far darker. There's a chilling beauty in that. Hermione had always been the best in her class, the one who knew every loophole and clause in the school rulebook. She understood magical bureaucracy better than anyone, and she used that knowledge not to uphold the system, but to burn it from within. This moment also invites us to re-evaluate our definitions of morality and legality. Were her actions justified simply because they were aimed at toppling a corrupt regime? Does the righteousness of a cause absolve one from the consequences of illegal methods? These are questions the book does not answer, but they hang heavily in the air, especially for readers who grew up seeing Hermione as the moral compass of the trio. Her descent into document forgery is not a betrayal of her character, but an evolution of it, an adaptation to a world where rules no longer protected the good. Rowling's genius lies in making these transformations feel natural. She never draws excessive attention to the fact that Hermione commits a serious crime. Instead, it is tucked neatly between descriptions of potions, disguises, and plans. But that subtlety is what makes it more haunting. The reader is left to confront the implications on their own, to realize that even the brightest witch of her age is capable of deception when the situation demands it. This moment is also deeply symbolic. For years, Hermione's value in her ability to memorize spells, laws, and procedures. She was the one who knew how to summon the right charm or cite the correct rule. But now her strength came not from obedience, but from subversion. She used her intellect not to follow the law, but to break it. And she did so without seeking permission or forgiveness. In many ways, Hermione's forgeries are a quiet rebellion against everything she once held dear. Her faith in institutions, rules, and adult authority had been eroded. She no longer trusted the system to do what was right, so she created her own way forward, even if that path led through deception. The scene in the ministry is tense and full of suspense, but beneath it lies a deeper theme, the loss of innocence, the death of naivety, and the birth of radical action. It's not an exaggeration to say that Hermione's forged documents helped save lives. Without them, the trio would not have entered the ministry, would not have stolen the locket, and would not have set in motion the series of events that led to Voldemort's downfall. But the cost was heavy. Hermione had to become something she never wanted to be, a forger, a liar, a criminal in the eyes of the law she once revered. This story is a reminder that heroes are not defined by their ability to follow rules, but by their courage to break them when justice demands it. Hermione Granger's forged ministry passes were not just pieces of enchanted parchment, they were symbols of a world turned upside down, and of a girl who dared to write her own laws when the existing ones failed. In that moment, Hermione was no longer the top student of Hogwarts. She was a revolutionary. Number 21 helped hide Harry from the ministry. At the start of her journey at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger was the very embodiment of rule-following perfection. Her dedication to structure and authority was so extreme that even the possibility of losing house points sent her into a spiral of anxiety. She once chastised Harry and Ron for attempting to duel Draco Malfoy after hours, insisting they would get into terrible trouble. That Hermione, the nervous first year who panicked when she accidentally lit Snape's robes on fire, seems like a distant shadow when compared to the girl who would later knowingly conspire against the Ministry of Magic. The transformation wasn't instant, but by the time Harry arrived at number 12, Grimmauld Place in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Hermione had become something altogether different. A covert operative, deeply embedded in a rebellion against the very government she had once deferred to with blind respect. It was the summer before their 5th year. Harry had been attacked by Dementors in Little Whinging, and instead of receiving the help he deserved, he was promptly placed under threat of expulsion and even prosecution. The Ministry of Magic, particularly under Cornelius Fudge's paranoia, had become increasingly authoritarian. To the public, Harry was portrayed as an unstable liar, and he was considered dangerous by a significant portion of the wizarding world. When he was forcibly removed from the Dursleys' home and transported to Grimmauld Place, secret headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, his very presence there was an act of legal defiance. And Hermione? She wasn't just informed, she was complicit. The girl who once proudly corrected professors who memorized the school rulebook before setting foot on the Hogwarts Express was now aiding and abetting a fugitive. And not quietly either. Hermione didn't simply agree to stay silent, she actively participated in his concealment. She knew where he was, she knew the Ministry was searching for him, and she remained silent. She even helped him integrate into the inner workings of the Order's base, observing meetings, passing along information, and helping to coordinate resistance efforts within the confines of the school. In this way, Hermione crossed a definitive moral line, one that transformed her from a top student into a political dissident. This was no small departure from her former self. In Philosopher's Stone, Hermione cried in the bathroom because Ron had insulted her obsession with rules. That moment of isolation, followed by her rescue from the troll, marked the start of her friendship with Harry and Ron. It also subtly marked the beginning of her journey toward personal rebellion. Yet it was still unfathomable in those early years to imagine her ever committing an actual crime against the magical establishment. But crimes they were. Harboring a fugitive is illegal in any society, magical or not. And in this case, Harry was being sought not just as a schoolboy, accused of misconduct, but as a potential political agitator. The Ministry had moved from justice into propaganda, and Hermione, recognizing the corruption, chose loyalty to Harry over obedience to law. What makes this moment especially powerful is how silent the adult figures remained. Where was Professor McGonagall? The stern deputy headmistress, known for her unshakable sense of order and discipline, would surely have disapproved of such an operation, had she known. But it seems she didn't. Dumbledore had intentionally kept many details about the Order's activities from the Hogwarts staff, preferring plausible deniability. Yet this raises troubling questions. Was McGonagall truly unaware of what her brightest student was doing over the summer, or had she, like Hermione, made the choice to quietly rebel against the Ministry's tightening grip? Hermione's dissent or assent, depending on perspective, into rule-breaking wasn't done out of recklessness. It was deliberate, intellectual, and deeply rooted in her sense of justice. She no longer obeyed rules for their own sake. Instead, she evaluated their moral weight. This is, in some ways, a much more dangerous transformation. The obedient student is predictable, the moral dissident is powerful. By the time she assisted in hiding Harry, Hermione had learned that not all rules are created equal, and some institutions are built to preserve injustice. Her allegiance was no longer to the ministry or even to Hogwarts. It was to truth, to Harry, and to a future she believed could still be saved. There is a passage in Order of the Phoenix that quietly illustrates this transformation. When Harry finally arrives at Grimmauld Place, he is greeted by Hermione with urgency and caution. She updates him on the Order's movements, explains the Ministry's manipulations, and reassures him that they are not going to let them do anything to you. It's a simple phrase on the surface, but it speaks volumes. Them isn't just the Dursleys anymore. It's the Ministry, the system, the laws. And we isn't just a group of friends. It's a covert alliance. Hermione has stopped being a student of magic and started becoming a student of rebellion. This shift is especially ironic given her roots. A Muggle-born witch, Hermione had every reason to respect magical authority. It had offered her a place, a future, an identity. Yet perhaps it was this outsider status that allowed her to see what others could not. Unlike Harry, born into fame, or Ron, raised in the magical world, Hermione had to build her place in it from scratch. And when that world proved capable of injustice, when it threatened to silence her friend and distort the truth, she saw it not as something sacred, but something fallible. Her act of hiding Harry was an act of disillusionment, a painful yet necessary rejection of an institution she had once idolized. What's fascinating is how seamlessly she made the transition. There was no breakdown, no moment of hesitation. Hermione didn't agonize over the legality of their actions. By the time she helped conceal Harry, her mind was already made up. The stakes were too high, the lies too blatant, the danger too real. The girl who once needed permission to breathe now took matters into her own hands. She stopped asking for approval, she started acting, and the system in turn became her adversary. This period in the story is also where the lines between good and evil begin to blur. The Ministry of Magic, which once stood as a symbol of magical governance, becomes a symbol of oppression and fear. It censors newspapers, manipulates public perception, and sends dementors to terrorize teenagers. In this context, Hermione's actions seem not just forgivable but necessary. She isn't breaking the rules out of adolescent defiance. She's engaging in civil disobedience. She's part of a tradition that stretches from underground resistance movements to whistleblowers. The Hermione who hid Harry is closer to a revolutionary than a student. There's an understated moment when she tells Harry, "We've got to be careful, you're being watched." This isn't paranoia, it's strategy. She's become fluent in the language of secrecy, coded messages, and tactical silence. Her intelligence is no longer confined to textbooks, it's political. And it's in these quiet acts, hiding Harry, listening at doors, organizing Dumbledore's army, that Hermione becomes something far more dangerous than a brilliant student. She becomes an agent of change. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of this transformation is how alone she seems in it. Ron is often preoccupied with his own insecurities. Harry is consumed by grief and rage. But Hermione, methodical and composed, shoulders the weight of moral clarity. She sees the larger picture, she knows what's at stake, and she acts without hesitation. That isolation makes her actions all the more heroic and all the more tragic. She has outgrown the protections of childhood, but she hasn't yet found the guidance of adulthood. She is, in every sense, acting on instinct and conviction alone. Looking back, it is tempting to romanticize Hermione's role in the rebellion, but we must also acknowledge the cost. She became a criminal in the eyes of the law. She risked expulsion, imprisonment, even death. and she did so not for glory but for loyalty. Her decision to hide Harry was the culmination of years of growth, loss, and quiet courage. It was also the moment when the last trace of her former self, the girl obsessed with prefect badges and library fines, vanished forever. Her transformation raises an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the brightest students must become outlaws to preserve the justice. Sometimes the ones who care most about order must break it to protect what is right. Hermione Granger's decision to help hide Harry Potter from the Ministry was not a betrayal of Hogwarts. It was a defense of everything Hogwarts was supposed to stand for. In helping a friend, she redefined what it meant to be brave, and in breaking the rules, she became something greater than a student. She became a warrior. Number 22. Used forbidden books without permission. In her second year at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger revealed a side of herself that most teachers and classmates never expected. To many, she was the model student, disciplined, respectful, always obeying the rules. But beneath that polished surface lay a far more complex girl, one who valued knowledge above authority and who, when the stakes were high enough, would not hesitate to bend or even break the very rules she swore to uphold. One of the most striking examples of this was her repeated use of forbidden texts, books that no ordinary student was ever meant to touch, let alone copy from or keep hidden in their bag. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the threat of the unknown monster terrorizing the school drove Hermione to dig deeper than ever into the darker corners of Hogwarts' vast library. The restricted section was off limits to students unless they had special permission from a teacher, which was supposed to be rare and strictly supervised. Yet somehow, Hermione was able to obtain a crucial piece of information that not even the professors seemed to consider. She found the truth about the basilisk, a giant serpent that killed with its stare and slithered through the castle's plumbing system. She found this revelation in a library book, one that she had ripped a page from, a shocking act of vandalism by someone usually so protective of books. This was not the only time Hermione displayed a disturbing comfort with crossing academic boundaries. In fact, it became a pattern. In her 6th year, during the events of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she grew obsessed with tracking down the nature of a mysterious spell called Sectum Sempra, found in a battered old textbook once owned by the so-called Half-Blood Prince. While it was Harry who used the spell, Hermione was the first to question the morality of using information from such a dubious source. Yet even as she warned him, she herself was secretly reading texts on dark potions and spellwork, books not openly available in the school's standard collection. Her hypocrisy was subtle but undeniable. She criticized Harry for trusting the prince's annotations, but never revealed the full extent of the materials she had consulted on her own. Her ambition to understand every aspect of magic often outweighed her judgment. As she had done in her 2nd year, Hermione continued to access forbidden knowledge, and this time without the looming excuse of a school-wide crisis. These weren't desperate times calling for desperate measures. These were casual evenings in the common room, her nose buried in something ancient, and clearly not on the approved reading list. In that same year, she was one of the first to figure out that the mysterious potion Harry had consumed during Slughorn's class was Felix Felicis. She had known about it long before Slughorn's lesson, describing it with eerie precision. Liquid luck. It's a banned substance in organized competitions, of course, and it's tricky to make. She spoke as someone intimately familiar with its properties, but how? There was no indication that it had been formally taught before. The answer was obvious to anyone paying close attention. Hermione had been reading materials far beyond her year. One must wonder how Hermione obtained access to such texts in the first place. The most obvious answer would be permission from a professor, but no moment in the books ever describes McGonagall, Flitwick, or even Dumbledore handing her a slip of authorization to wander into the restricted section at will. In Philosopher's Stone, she borrowed a note from Professor Lockhart to allow Harry to enter the restricted section under the guise of academic curiosity. If even Harry needed such permission, and if Madame Pince was guarding those books with obsessive care, How did Hermione, known to spend hours in the library, get past that gatekeeper? One theory is that Hermione learned to bypass Madame Pince entirely. It wouldn't be out of character for her to devise a clever charm or trick to distract the librarian. After all, this is the same girl who enchanted coins for the DA meetings in 5th year and who brewed polyjuice potion in a bathroom, all while avoiding detection for months. Her resourcefulness bordered on subversive, and in the pursuit of knowledge, Hermione rarely saw rules as obstacles. If anything, she saw them as minor inconveniences. In the Chamber of Secrets, Hermione's use of the polyjuice potion is another glaring violation of the rules. The instructions and ingredients for the potion were tightly restricted, and the recipe itself was found only in the book Moste Potenti Potions, a volume housed in the restricted section for good reason. The transformation it allows is not only dangerous but incredibly invasive, yet Hermione stole the recipe, brewed the potion, and even stole ingredients from Snape's private cupboard. She did all of this not out of malice, but with a calm, calculating sense of purpose. She wanted to help, yes, but she was also undeniably thrilled by the intellectual challenge. This is the contradiction that defines Hermione's character. On the surface, she was the moral compass of the trio, the voice of reason who kept Harry and Ron from veering too far off course. But underneath, she was a rebel in disguise, one who obeyed authority only when it aligned with her own ideals. In truth, Hermione was more like Dumbledore than she probably realized. She valued knowledge, power, and the greater good, sometimes at the cost of transparency and obedience. Like Dumbledore, she was willing to do things in secret if she believed they were justified. Her actions in the Department of Mysteries further illustrate this point. As she stepped into a room full of unspeakable magic and mind-altering phenomena, Hermione showed no hesitation. She didn't flinch when confronted with the brain tentacles, or the time-turners, or the mysterious veil. She studied them. Her instinct was always to learn, to catalogue, to understand, even in the face of chaos. There was a danger in that curiosity, a danger she never quite acknowledged. She believed she could control what she discovered, but magic does not always yield to logic. Her selective morality also extended to her use of memory charms. In Deathly Hallows, Hermione wiped her parents' memories, a spell complex enough that only trained ministry workers should perform it. There is no evidence she ever received formal instruction on memory modification, and yet she not only performed it, she altered their identities and implanted new memories. Where did she learn how to do that? What book told her how to rewrite reality? Certainly not the average charms textbook. The truth is that Hermione was always steps ahead of everyone else, and that included knowing what not to reveal. She never admitted to using the restricted section without permission, and she certainly never told McGonagall that she had once removed pages from a book. In fact, she let Harry and Ron believe that the clue about the basilisk had been left for them innocently, not torn out by her own hand. She played the part of the innocent researcher, but her silence protected her from punishment. Even Madame Pince, the fearsome librarian, seemed strangely passive when it came to Hermione. Was it possible that she had simply grown used to Hermione's presence and turned a blind eye? Or perhaps Hermione found a way to magically replicate books without checking them out, leaving no trace of her transgressions. Her abilities with charms were advanced enough to manage such feats by 5th year, and her stealth was rarely matched. Hermione's relationship with forbidden books reflects a broader theme in the series. That power and knowledge are not inherently good or evil. What matters is how they're used. Yet the question remains, did Hermione always use them wisely, or did she simply get lucky, avoiding the same pitfalls that consumed others who dabbled in restricted knowledge like Tom Riddle or even Snape? She was not exempt from arrogance, and that arrogance often manifested in her reading habits. She believed she could master anything, no matter how complex or dangerous. Her certainty sometimes bordered on recklessness, especially when she kept secrets from those who might have helped her stay safe. In Goblet of Fire, she was the only one to suspect Rita Skeeter's animagus identity, and she alone carried out the plan to trap her. Once again, she found a magical loophole and exploited it, all by studying obscure laws in wizarding publications. Hermione may never have turned to the dark arts, but she danced on the edge of forbidden knowledge more than once. Her comfort with dangerous books, her tendency to conceal her sources, and her refusal to always ask for permission made her one of the most complex figures in Hogwarts history. She wasn't simply the brightest witch of her age, she was the most daring, the most calculating, and at times the most quietly rebellious. In her hands, even the most sacred rules became negotiable. Number 23 secretly spied on professors. In her 6th year at Hogwarts, Hermione Granger, usually the embodiment of rule-following diligence, stepped over a line that few seemed to notice. Driven by anxiety, suspicion, and loyalty to Harry, she became something else entirely, a covert operator in a private war. It was not enough to excel in every subject or be the teacher's favorite. This time, she took matters into her own hands, and unlike her usual remorseful self, she felt no guilt, no shame, only determination. What unfolded during that year was nothing short of an organized surveillance operation on Hogwarts staff and students, built from spells, assumptions, and complete disregard for privacy. It all centered around one obsession: Draco Malfoy. Harry was convinced that Draco had become a Death Eater, and Hermione, despite doubting his theory, did not try to stop the investigation. Instead, she participated. She actively joined in efforts to monitor Draco's movements, behavior, and associations. This was no minor rule-breaking in the name of youthful mischief. It was deliberate and calculated. Hermione used magic to eavesdrop, track, and spy on her classmates and professors. She employed a non-verbal confundus charm during the Quidditch trials earlier in the year, but that was only the beginning. Her actions in regard to Professor Snape and Draco were far more serious and premeditated. One of the clearest examples of her surveillance occurred when she helped Harry sneak into the girls' bathroom where Moaning Myrtle resided, just to spy on Draco. Knowing that Draco had taken to hiding there, Hermione willingly supported this invasion of privacy. It wasn't just about Harry's suspicions anymore, it became a mission of their own. The fact that Myrtle later confirmed Draco had been crying and stressed showed that what they were witnessing was not a villain, but a vulnerable teenager cornered by fear and family expectations. Yet Hermione never voiced hesitation. She never pulled Harry back. Instead, she listened, observed, and waited. She was also instrumental in using magical means to keep track of professors. While Harry was obsessed with following Snape, Hermione researched spells to enhance their observation. She helped refine the use of the Muffliato charm, which was originally created by the Half-Blood Prince, to make sure others didn't hear their whispers. She studied magical ways to disguise their presence, going beyond what the school allowed. These were not simple acts of curiosity. They were intrusive and uninvited violations of others' space. Perhaps the most shocking moment was her use of tracking spells. Though not directly spelled out in the books, it's implied through Harry's narration in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince that Hermione contributed enchantments and magical theories to help discover where Draco was going and who he was meeting. She consulted books from the library's restricted section. She applied surveillance logic with cold precision. There was no professor involved, no consent, and certainly no reporting to Dumbledore. She took it upon herself to track the private behavior of fellow students and teachers. For a girl who once wailed over breaking into the third-floor corridor in her first year, this evolution was stark. In one memorable instance, Hermione even sabotaged Ron's relationship with Lavender by manipulating timing and information. She justified it emotionally, but the tactic mirrored her general approach to things she didn't trust or couldn't control. She gathered intelligence, made assumptions, and acted in secret. The same pattern applied to her treatment of Draco. Whether he was guilty or not, Hermione had already decided that secrecy justified her actions. She had crossed into dangerous territory, and she didn't seem to care. When Dobby and Creature were tasked with following Malfoy, Harry said, "I want to know where he's going and what he's doing. I want to know who he's meeting and what they're saying." And Hermione agreed. She allowed the surveillance to continue, knowing full well it violated every rule of magical ethics they had been taught. House elves were used as tools, and she said nothing. This was the same girl who founded SPEW, who once called for dignity and respect for elf kind. Yet in her 6th year, the cause justified the means. Her moral compass was strangely quiet during this period. There were no second thoughts, no internal struggles about crossing lines. When Harry used the Marauder's map, when he tested the vanishing cabinet theory, when he interrogated Slughorn, Hermione was always there, advising, tweaking, helping. She didn't resist. She adjusted. Her intelligence became a weapon in an underground campaign to uncover secrets. Not once did she stop and ask, "What if we're wrong?" The most unsettling part of her transformation was how naturally she adapted to the role. This wasn't like brewing Polyjuice Potion in 2nd year, when she was hesitant and constantly stressed. This time, she was confident. Coldly, logical, even a little ruthless. She didn't just follow Harry, she enhanced his methods. She turned theory into action, she weaponized knowledge. It wasn't a childish game, it was espionage, and she was good at it. Some might say that the threat of Voldemort justified extreme action, but Hogwarts was still a school. These were still children. And Hermione was still a student, one who had once sobbed over losing house points, who once feared McGonagall's disapproval more than a werewolf. That Hermione seemed gone. In her place stood a war tactician in a schoolgirl uniform, conducting surveillance spells like they were homework assignments. Her drive to do what was right had blurred into an obsession with control. Even the adults didn't notice, or chose not to. Dumbledore remained distant. McGonagall trusted Hermione too much to question her actions. Slughorn was oblivious, and Snape, the man she suspected most, was far too focused on his own dangerous double life to discipline her. So Hermione acted in the shadows, unchecked and unchallenged. Her reputation as the best student became a cover. Nobody imagined that the girl who read 12 books before breakfast was also mapping out teacher schedules and magical access points to private quarters. At no point did she reflect on how it felt to be watched. She never questioned what it meant to spy on someone who hadn't yet committed a crime. Her confidence in their moral superiority was absolute. Hermione had learned that rules mattered until they didn't. Until war made them inconvenient, until certainty replaced doubt. She had become what she used to fear, a wielder of power without oversight. The spell she used in the library to ward off intruders was a disillusionment charm combined with a silencing spell. She didn't want Madame Pince to know she was sneaking into restricted sections after hours. She applied this same combination when they spied on Slughorn's office and Draco's hiding places. She used magical theory not for learning, but for watching. All of this from a girl who once insisted that breaking rules just isn't worth it. The irony was sharp. Hermione had started her magical education as the living symbol of rules and order, yet by the 6th year she had shed those layers like a snake outgrowing its skin. What remained was something efficient, brilliant, and morally ambiguous. She didn't lose her intelligence, she just redirected it, and in doing so she broke one of the most sacred boundaries in any school, the trust between students and their professors. Even when the truth about Draco came to light, that he had been forced into Voldemort's service, that he was terrified and desperate, Hermione didn't express remorse. There was no moment of pause, no apology for the months spent shadowing him like a criminal. Because to her, the end had justified the means, and in that she stepped into a new identity. She was no longer just the brightest witch of her age. She had become a silent observer of secrets, one who never asked permission and never looked back. Number 24 used magic on a muggle without a second thought. Hermione Granger had always been the poster child of rule-following, From the very first year at Hogwarts, she memorized Hogwarts a History, raised her hand in every class, and corrected others when they misquoted spells or violated school regulations. She once tried to prevent Harry and Ron from sneaking out at night by threatening to tell on them. She was the same girl who panicked at the idea of being expelled and famously said, "We could have been killed, or worse, expelled." Yet despite this deep-seated commitment to rules, there came a moment when her sense of justice, outrage, and protectiveness overrode every lesson she had learned about magical lore. That moment involved a quill, a lie, and Rita Skeeter. By the time of the Triwizard Tournament, Hermione had changed. She was no longer the trembling girl afraid of breaking curfew. She had discovered the weight of injustice and had begun to resist it with force. The Daily Prophet's campaign to smear Harry's name and tarnish Dumbledore's reputation enraged her, but nothing fueled her fury more than the lies Rita Skeeter published about Hermione herself. One of those articles, Harry Potter's Secret Heartache, alleged that Hermione had toyed with both Harry and Victor Crumb. This wasn't just an invasion of privacy, it was character assassination. Hermione's anger simmered beneath her calm exterior, but she was calculating, and when the opportunity came, she acted with precision, and with a vengeance that no longer resembled a schoolgirl. The confrontation with Rita Skeeter began in the Hogwarts Express at the end of the 4th year. There, Hermione threatened her with a barely concealed menace. Though the book frames it more subtly, the film makes the threat unmistakable. Hermione's voice is steely, her posture firm. She leans in, towering over Rita, whose glamorous mask begins to crack. There was no wand raised, but the implication was clear. Hermione, at this moment, was not merely a student. She was judge, jury, and potential executioner. It was the beginning of her descent into rule-breaking for what she believed was a righteous cause. Hermione knew precisely what she was doing. By this point, she had already discovered Rita's secret, that the journalist was an unregistered animagus, transforming into a beetle to eavesdrop on conversations. This was a serious violation of magical law. But rather than report it to the Ministry of Magic, Hermione took justice into her own hands. She captured Rita in her beetle form and imprisoned her in a glass jar hidden inside her school bag for weeks, without a trial, without adult supervision. It was vigilante justice, calm, deliberate, and completely illegal. Then came the act that truly crossed the line, and not in the magical world, but in the Muggle one. When Hermione, Harry, and the Weasleys visited Diagon Alley in preparation for their 5th year, they also attended a book-signing event, partially in the Muggle part of the station. Rita was there, of course, trying to claw her way back into public attention after the damage Hermione had inflicted on her career. During this event, Hermione did not simply warn Rita, she used magic, real, visible, undeniable magic, in a location where Muggles were present. The book doesn't elaborate on this incident in detail, but the film shows it vividly. Hermione, with fire in her eyes, flicks her wand, and Rita's enchanted quill explodes along with her inkpot. The magic is neither subtle nor defensive. It's aggressive, targeted sabotage. Feathers and ink splatter everywhere. Hermione doesn't pause to assess whether any Muggles saw the spell. She acts on instinct and rage. This moment is not a prank or a minor charm. It is the use of magic against a member of the press, in a semi-public setting. And it violates 2 foundational rules of the magical world, the Statute of Secrecy and the Underage Sorcery Decree. The Statute of Secrecy, enforced by the Ministry of Magic, explicitly prohibits the use of magic in front of Muggles. The decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, which Hermione had surely memorized, forbids underage wizards from performing spells outside of school, especially in Muggle environments. Hermione violated both, knowingly. There was no hesitation, no moment of panic. Her choice was deliberate, and that's what makes the moment so compelling and so disturbing. What's more, the context removes any possible excuse. Hermione wasn't defending herself or others from danger. She wasn't repelling a Dementor like Harry had in The Order of the Phoenix. She wasn't fighting Death Eaters. She was retaliating against bad journalism. It wasn't a duel, it was revenge. And in doing so, she demonstrated a truth often glossed over in the rosy memories of the trio's adventures. Hermione Granger, when provoked, could be just as dangerous and impulsive as Harry or Ron, perhaps even more so because she was more capable. It's easy to justify Hermione's actions in hindsight. Rita Skeeter was an awful person. She exploited teenage trauma for headlines, turned private grief into scandal, and almost cost Harry the support of the magical community. But this is precisely why Hermione's decision is so important to examine. She didn't go to Professor McGonagall or write to Dumbledore. She didn't appeal to the wizarding courts or the press council. She used magic. She broke the law, and she did so with full awareness of what she was doing. In this moment, Hermione behaved not like a student, but like a rogue aura, one who believes the system won't deliver justice, so she must deliver it herself. The morality of this moment is complex. On one hand, Hermione's determination to protect her friends and expose corruption is admirable. On the other, her methods mirror those of the very enemies the Order of the Phoenix would later fight. After all, Dolores Umbridge used her authority to silence students and manipulate the law for personal ends. Barty Crouch Sr. sent people to Azkaban without trials. Cornelius Fudge buried the truth to preserve his power. And here, a 15-year-old Hermione made herself judge and executioner of Rita Skeeter's fate, deciding that magical laws did not apply to her if the cause was just. Even Dumbledore, who often turned a blind eye to the trio's misadventures, might have balked at this particular act. The headmaster once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Hermione's choice was clear. She chose action over protocol, magic over words, and intimidation over process. It worked. Rita Skeeter disappeared from the headlines for a time, but it came at the cost of Hermione's own principles. What makes this moment even more unsettling is how easily it is forgotten. Neither the school nor the ministry reprimands Hermione. There is no letter from Mafalda Hopkirk, no visit from the improper use of magic office. The incident is brushed aside, overshadowed by the rising threat of Voldemort and the chaos of the coming war. But the memory lingers. Hermione crossed a line, and no one noticed or cared. It raises an uncomfortable question. In a world teetering toward darkness, how easy is it for even the brightest witches to fall into shadow when no one is watching? This moment also foreshadows Hermione's later decisions. When she erases her parents' memories in The Deathly Hallows, she does so with the same calm finality. Again, she uses magic on Muggles, this time her own family, to protect them from Voldemort. The act is loving, but still a massive magical violation. The seeds of that moral flexibility were planted back in that moment with Rita Skeeter. It was the first time Hermione put her cause above the law. It wouldn't be the last. Hermione Granger's character is richer for this complexity. She is not a saint, not a robotic rule enforcer. She is passionate, intelligent, and deeply loyal, but she is also capable of crossing lines when she believes she must. This doesn't diminish her heroism, it complicates it. It reminds us that even heroes can make questionable choices, and sometimes those choices begin with a wand, a quill, and a very bad reporter. In the end, Hermione's moment of magical retaliation is not just a footnote in the story, it's a crack in the surface, a glimpse into how the war shaped her long before the final battle. Before the Horcrux hunt, before the torture at Malfoy Manor, before the fires of Hogwarts, Hermione Granger had already tasted what it felt like to take power into her own hands, and she did not hesitate. Number 25 carried forbidden dark magic with her. Hermione Granger had always been the emblem of rule-following brilliance at Hogwarts, a student who once refused to step out of bounds without written permission, who valued the structure of laws, discipline, and the boundaries that kept chaos at bay. But something changed during the hunt for Voldemort's Horcruxes. In the shadows of that desperate mission, Hermione made a choice that starkly contradicted everything she once stood for. She packed in her enchanted bag a copy of a book about dark magic, a decision not born of recklessness, but of deliberate, premeditated intent. The book in question was Secrets of the Darkest Art, a banned and highly dangerous tome filled with detailed instructions on creating Horcruxes, performing forbidden rituals, and executing hexes that could maim or kill. Found at 12 Grimmauld Place, the old Black family home, this book was never meant to be touched by Hogwarts students, let alone secretly carried across the country. The fact that Hermione chose to keep such a book at her side, tucked away between a change of clothes and polyjuice potion ingredients, is more than just a footnote in their journey. It's a moment of severe ethical contradiction. Not only did she break the very laws she so often invoked, but she did so quietly, without remorse, under the banner of necessity. For anyone else, say, a student like Draco Malfoy, the consequences would have been swift and brutal. Possession of banned magical texts often led to immediate expulsion from Hogwarts, followed by mandatory interrogation at the Ministry of Magic under Veritaserum. Yet Hermione's action was seen as noble preparation. She was planning ahead, being resourceful. The double standard is hard to ignore. Hermione herself once said, "I'm hoping to do some good in the world." And in many ways, she did. But does the end justify the means when those means involve harbouring knowledge so corruptive that Dumbledore himself once said it could rot the soul? When she opened the pages of Secrets of the Darkest Art, Hermione crossed a line she would never publicly acknowledge. Within those pages were diagrams of mutilated bodies, instructions for soul-splitting, and enchantments outlawed by the International Confederation of Wizards. It wasn't a theoretical text, it was a manual for evil, and she, the brightest witch of her age, carried it like one might carry a textbook for potions class. The justification often given is that Hermione never intended to use the magic inside, but that doesn't change the fundamental truth. Possession is still a crime. Just as a muggle could not legally own a book of chemical bomb recipes, a witch in the magical world is bound by the laws of spell control. Hermione didn't just study forbidden knowledge, she transported it, concealed it, and exposed Harry and Ron to its influence. One could argue that the trio needed the information to destroy Horcruxes, but here's the critical flaw in that. Hermione didn't consult the Ministry, or seek out an Order member, or even warn anyone of what she had found. She took the book for herself, making the decision that she alone was worthy of its secrets. It wasn't the first time Hermione had shown a willingness to bend the rules, but this particular choice struck deeper. She wasn't breaking a school policy to attend a Quidditch match or sneaking into the restricted section to research a potion. She was engaging with dark magic, willingly, secretly, and with full knowledge of what that meant. The girl who once scolded Harry for using the Sectum Sempra curse without knowing what it did was now in possession of curses that made Sectum Sempra look like a paper cut. Her silence was not innocence, it was selective morality. What makes this moment even more jarring is Hermione's previous behaviour regarding the dark arts. In The Half-Blood Prince, she was vocally opposed to Harry using the prince's textbook, declaring, "You shouldn't be using something when you don't even know where it comes from." But Hermione did exactly that. She embraced a source of unknown and morally tainted power, trusting that she, unlike others, would remain uncorrupted. It is a dangerous assumption, and it carries with it the arrogance that she often accused others of harbouring. In the world of magic, intention does matter, but it does not erase consequences. Just because Hermione did not use the spells does not mean she wasn't tempted, and even if she wasn't, what message does it send when the same rules that would have damned another student are swept aside because the offender is a war hero in training? Hermione's possession of that book wasn't punished. It wasn't even questioned. It was celebrated as another sign of her brilliance. But in doing so, the wizarding world showed its bias. Rules apply to some, but not all. The irony grows deeper when one remembers that Umbridge, the most reviled figure in Hogwarts history, once declared that information on dark magic should be completely forbidden, even for educational purposes. While Umbridge's methods were draconian and cruel, her stance on the danger of exposure to such knowledge was not unfounded. It begs the question, if someone like Hermione needs dark magic to fight dark magic, how different is she from the enemies she despises? When does the line between preparation and corruption blur beyond recognition? Even Dumbledore, who once kept secrets to protect those around him, warned against the casual exposure to dark knowledge. And yet Hermione made that choice for her friends without discussion. She brought the darkness into their midst. The book was not kept in a vault, it was within arm's reach of Ron's sleeping bag. It was a decision that endangered them all psychologically and magically. In Deathly Hallows, the trio mentions the information from the book as if it were a neutral academic resource, but the truth is more haunting. The book was a silent fourth member of their journey, whispering possibilities that no teenager should have known. The hypocrisy is sharper still when you consider Hermione's treatment of others who broke rules. She regularly chastised Harry and Ron for sneaking out or breaking curfew. She turned in students for cheating and once jinxed a parchment to curse anyone who broke a secret agreement. Her sense of justice was not subtle, but when it came to herself, she made exceptions. Because this wasn't just rule-breaking, it was ideology-breaking. Hermione built her identity on being the moral compass of the trio, the one who knew right from wrong. Yet in this case, she decided that morality was flexible when the stakes were high enough. This raises uncomfortable questions for those who idolize her. Is Hermione's decision an example of pragmatism in war, or is it a revelation of hidden elitism? Does she believe, deep down, that she is better equipped to handle the darkness than others? That she is immune to the corruption that destroyed Tom Riddle? If so, it's a dangerous belief, and it echoes the very hubris that led many down dark paths before her. Hermione was not invincible. She was young, passionate, and deeply afraid, and sometimes fear disguises itself as logic. The tragedy of this moment lies in how it redefines Hermione's character. Not because she became evil, she didn't, but because she allowed herself to believe that being on the right side of history gave her the right to bypass the rules she once worshipped. She didn't fall, but she did waver. She took a step into the darkness and chose not to speak of it. That silence, that quiet rationalization, is the moment where her idealism fractured. She was no longer just the girl who loved books. She was the girl who decided which books should be banned for others, but not for herself. This isn't a condemnation of Hermione's heart, nor a denial of her courage, but it is a reminder that even the brightest witch of her age was capable of justifying darkness when the situation suited her. The war against Voldemort was filled with compromises, but not all of them should be forgotten once victory is achieved. When history is written, it's tempting to frame choices like Hermione's as brilliant strategy, but the truth is more complicated. She committed an act that would have destroyed another student's future. She simply didn't have to pay the price. And so the book remained in her bag, carried like a talisman of forbidden knowledge, a contradiction stuffed between a bag of essence of Dittany and a portrait of Phineas Nigellus. No teacher ever questioned her, no authority ever found out. But the real story is not about punishment, it's about the story she told herself to justify it, that she was saving the world, that her hands remained clean, but hands that carry dark magic, no matter how noble the cause, are never truly spotless. Number 26. Enchanted, the Gringotts banking system. On the surface, Hermione Granger was always the voice of reason, the stern reminder of rules and structure in a world that constantly blurred the lines between good and evil. She once scolded Harry Potter for sneaking into the restricted section of the library, whispering with a mixture of horror and fascination that breaking rules just for curiosity's sake was unacceptable. She docked points from Gryffindor for minor infractions, corrected her peers for not following proper spellwork procedures, and once said with grave sincerity that worse than expulsion was disappointing Professor McGonagall. But in the final months of the Second Wizarding War, Hermione crossed a line so stark, so astonishingly criminal, that it stood in jarring contrast to the image of the bushy-haired prefect clutching her timetable in third year. In the spring of what would have been her 7th year at Hogwarts, Hermione Jean Granger participated in one of the most dangerous and illegal operations ever attempted by a minor in the magical world, the infiltration and magical sabotage of Gringotts Wizarding Bank. This was not an innocent mistake, not a youthful misstep in judgment. It was a deliberate, premeditated assault on the most secure financial institution in the wizarding world, and she was the mastermind of key components in that operation. To begin with, Hermione brewed and ingested Polyjuice Potion, assuming the identity of Bellatrix Lestrange, one of the most feared Death Eaters in Voldemort's circle. It was a complex deception that involved not only stealing Bellatrix's hair, but also practicing her voice and mannerisms, a grotesque impersonation of someone known for torture and murder. "I don't think I can do it," Hermione had whispered to Harry, trembling not from fear of the mission's dangers, but from the knowledge of how vile her disguise truly was. And yet she did it anyway. She took the polyjuice, transformed herself into a murderer, and walked into Gringotts hand in hand with deception. But the transformation was only the beginning. When the goblins, particularly Griphook, their reluctant ally, began to suspect that something was amiss, Hermione did not resort to clever words or negotiation. She used magic, and not just any magic. She cast spells on goblins. She cursed them, she stunned them, she hexed them without hesitation. Spells ricocheted off the high marble walls, centuries-old enchantments shattered, and the hallowed halls of the bank were turned into a war zone. It is worth remembering that the goblins of Gringotts are not simple clerks. They are powerful, magical beings, autonomous and deeply protective of their sacred duties. Attacking them is not merely a violation of school rules, it is a political act, an offence against an entire race. Hermione also used the Imperious Curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses, to manipulate Travers, another Death Eater, making him unwittingly assist their plan. This is an act for which any witch or wizard could be sent to Azkaban for life. The Imperious Curse robs a person of free will. It is the very embodiment of magical tyranny. Yet Hermione cast it as coldly as if it were a simple jinx. A girl who once shrieked in horror when she found out that using a time-turner recklessly could break the fabric of time itself was now subjugating minds without remorse. Once inside the bank's lower vaults, Hermione's crimes escalated. Facing the dragon that guarded the Lestrange family vault, she joined Harry and Ron in using stunning spells and noise to frighten the poor beast, forcing it to retreat in pain and confusion. Then came the chaos. Hermione set fire to the enchanted treasure inside the vault, cursed items that multiplied and burned flesh, not to destroy them but to escape their entrapment. In the panic, the ancient protections of Gringotts faltered. Stone crumbled. Vaults echoed with destruction. The trio climbed atop the dragon, burst through the floor of the bank and soared into the sky, leaving behind ruins and confusion. According to Gringotts' charter, a document older than Hogwarts itself, any magical interference with a vault is considered a declaration of war. Hermione didn't just open a vault, she desecrated it. She didn't just break into the bank, she dismantled the very idea of it being impenetrable. For centuries, Gringotts had been a symbol of trust between goblins and wizards, fragile as it was. Hermione shattered that symbol in less than an hour. The irony is impossible to ignore. This is the same Hermione Granger who once slapped Ron Weasley for suggesting they sneak out of bed past curfew. She once created SPEW, a society for the protection of house elves, passionately defending magical creatures' rights. Yet in that vault she did not flinch while terrifying and hurting goblins, beings she had previously lectured others to treat with dignity. The hypocrisy is staggering. For someone so obsessed with the moral high ground, Hermione plunged into the deepest ethical abyss. Her defenders will argue context. They will say she was at war, that Voldemort's rise to power necessitated extreme action, that desperate times called for desperate measures, but there is a distinction between necessity and recklessness, between survival and destruction. Hermione did not simply infiltrate Gringotts, she helped desecrate it. She did not merely use a disguise, she became the villain she had studied to loathe, and she did it all in the name of a cause, believing the ends justified the means. One must also wonder, what would Dumbledore have said? He had always trusted Hermione, had even given her the time-turner in third year because of her exceptional responsibility. But would he have approved of mind control, destruction of magical property, impersonation of a Death Eater, and terrorizing a dragon? Dumbledore believed in fighting evil, yes, but not in becoming it. He warned time and time again that power, when wielded without restraint, leads down a path as dark as the one Voldemort followed. Hermione, for all her intelligence, teetered on that edge. And this wasn't a split-second decision made in panic. The Polyjuice potion takes a month to brew. She planned this. She read through laws, spells, vault blueprints, possibly even Gringotts' defensive enchantments. It was calculated. It was intentional. It was a crime. No different than a high-level heist in the Muggle world, except with the added danger of magical fallout and international scandal. There were consequences too, not for Hermione but for others. In the aftermath of the attack, Gringotts tightened security to a militaristic level. Innocent witches and wizards had their vaults inspected, accounts frozen, and movements questioned. Trust between goblins and wizard kind, already a fragile piece, deteriorated further. Hermione walked away from the wreckage on dragon wings, but the damage remained for those left on the ground. It's one thing to rebel against unfair systems, and another to trample centuries-old agreements in pursuit of your own version of justice. Hermione did not just break rules. She broke a covenant between species, a system that had balanced wizarding society for generations. For a girl who once wept over house elf discrimination, her actions reek of magical supremacy. She didn't consult goblin leaders, didn't attempt diplomacy. She marched in, wand raised, and carved out her path through fire and fear. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is how easily it is dismissed. Fans hail the moment as daring, thrilling, cinematic. But should we be cheering? Are we so swept up in the final battle's urgency that we excuse mind control, arson, and high-stakes fraud? If Draco Malfoy had done this, would we call him a criminal or a hero? There's a line in the Deathly Hallows just after they escape Gringotts, where Ron says, "That was brilliant. Can you believe we did it?" But Hermione doesn't respond. She stares out over the horizon in silence. Perhaps even she, in that moment, realized how far she had gone. That in fighting monsters, she had grown dangerously close to becoming one herself. Number 27. Dropped out of school and told no one. Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, the girl who raised her hand in every class, who followed the rules to the letter, who once said, "I hope you're pleased with yourselves, we could all have been killed," or worse, expelled, broke the ultimate rule. She didn't just bend a regulation or sneak into the restricted section of the library. She abandoned her education altogether. Without notifying the staff, without filling out forms, without saying a word. She disappeared from Hogwarts at the start of her 7th year and never returned, effectively becoming a fugitive in the eyes of the institution she had once revered above all else. For someone like Hermione, who valued structure, who memorized the rules in Hogwarts, a history, who reprimanded Harry and Ron for the smallest infractions, this was nothing short of a revolution. While Harry had a long history of conflicts with authority, and Ron tended to follow his best friend's lead, Hermione had always been the anchor tethering them to logic and law. Yet, in the wake of Voldemort's return and the Ministry's infiltration of the school, she made the most radical choice of all, to vanish without explanation. No transfer, no sabbatical, no academic leave, just gone. What makes this even more staggering is that she didn't just disappear. She erased herself. Before leaving, Hermione cast a powerful memory charm on her own parents, altering their identities and sending them to live under false names in Australia, far away from the rising darkness in Britain. In Deathly Hallows, she confesses, "I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really called Wendell and Monica Wilkins and that their life's ambition is to move to Australia." It's a haunting revelation. She not only left school, she obliterated her own past. No one at Hogwarts reported her. No owl was sent from the school. No official withdrawal process was mentioned. She wasn't expelled. She wasn't marked absent. It's as if her meticulous academic record vanished into thin air, as thoroughly as her presence in her parents' lives. And what's worse, no adult intervened. Not Minerva McGonagall, who had always praised Hermione's intellect, not Professor Flitwick or even the ever-vigilant Madame Pince. Her disappearance was met with institutional silence. For a school that maintained rigorous disciplinary standards, the absence of any action or inquiry speaks volumes. Technically, her act was desertion. In the middle of a war, she abandoned her formal education and joined an underground resistance movement. That resistance, though noble, was unsanctioned. She and her two friends went rogue, operating out of forests, stealing supplies, and plotting an assassination against Voldemort, with no approval or guidance. The trio became outlaws, hunted by the Ministry, with their names and faces on wanted posters. They were no longer students. They were fugitives. This action was not a moment of youthful rebellion. It was a calculated move. Hermione prepared for it in advance, packing an enchanted handbag with every item she thought they'd need, from a protective tent to books like Secrets of the Darkest Art. This wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. She planned her disappearance. She chose secrecy over transparency, independence over protocol. In a way, she committed a premeditated institutional suicide. She killed the version of herself who followed rules. And it's important to recognize how dramatically this contrasts with the image she built throughout 6 years at Hogwarts. She once turned in her own friends for sneaking out at night. She once harassed teachers about marking inconsistencies. She was the champion of order, but when the stakes rose beyond what a classroom could contain, she discarded the very identity she had clung to for so long. It was not Harry, with his legendary disregard for rules, who made the most daring break. It was Hermione. Even within the trio, she was the one who could have had an alternative. She didn't have a prophecy hanging over her head like Harry did. She didn't have a family of 7 younger siblings to protect like Ron. She was Muggle-born, yes, and in danger, but she could have hidden. Instead, she chose to walk directly into the storm, sacrificing her identity, her safety, and her academic future. There is bravery in battle, but what Hermione did was a quiet, personal demolition of everything she had worked for. And yet, her actions raise uncomfortable questions. What would have happened if another student, say Draco Malfoy or even Neville Longbottom, had simply failed to return to school without notice? Would they have been expelled? Would their families have received threats? Would the Ministry have intervened? The absence of formal consequences for Hermione seems almost like an unspoken acknowledgement by the magical establishment that the rules had become irrelevant in the face of tyranny. Or perhaps it was simply another sign of Hogwarts unraveling. Some fans argue that Hermione's choice was necessary, that war demanded sacrifices, but it's vital to acknowledge the cost of that decision. She gave up a future she had built meticulously, her perfect scores, her potential career in magical law, her dreams of reform, all postponed, if not lost. She went from student to soldier without ever being asked if she was ready. And perhaps no one was more surprised by her own transformation than she was. In Order of the Phoenix, Hermione had scolded Harry and Ron for planning to skip classes for Dumbledore's army insisting that education was still important even during dark times. Yet just 2 years later, she made a complete reversal. That moment, when she didn't board the Hogwarts Express, didn't report to the Great Hall, didn't open a textbook, marks a turning point in her character arc. It is when Hermione Granger stopped being a student and became a revolutionary. Her choice also serves as a critique of the institution she left behind. Hogwarts, despite its grandeur and traditions, was no longer a safe haven. With Snape as headmaster and Death Eaters on staff, the school had turned into an ideological battlefield. For Hermione, returning wasn't just unsafe, it was unacceptable. Still, she made no appeal, no protest, no letter to the Daily Prophet. She simply walked away, allowing the school to continue without her. It is in this silence that her rebellion becomes even louder, not with fire or fury, but with absence. The absence of formality, of consent, of acknowledgement. The girl who once corrected teachers, who begged to be allowed into every advanced class, didn't even ask for a leave of absence. She ghosted the entire system, and did it so effectively no one even called it out. So who, then, was the true rebel of the trio? Was it Harry, who broke into the Ministry and defied the Dark Lord himself? Was it Ron, who abandoned his family name to stand by the Chosen One? Or was it Hermione who erased her own existence from records, from family, from institutional memory, and walked into the unknown without permission or applause? There is a strange irony in this transformation. The rule breaker became a hero, yes, but only by becoming the kind of person she once condemned. In trying to save the world, Hermione Granger burned down her own carefully built life. Not out of recklessness, but from a deep and painful understanding that survival would require more than just cleverness or diligence. It would require erasing who she was to become who she needed to be. And maybe that's why, even after the war ended, there is no mention of her returning to school. No EWTs, no graduation ceremony, no final exams. Hermione, the ultimate academic, never got a diploma. It's a tragic, almost poetic irony. The girl who lived for tests and timetables sacrificed them all for a fight that offered no grades and no gold stars. She forfeited her top marks for freedom, and she never looked back. What began as a noble cause ended in a quiet revolution. Her rebellion was not loud, not flashy, but total. She left without permission, she altered memories, she disappeared from every system that defined her. And in doing so, Hermione Granger rewrote what it meant to be brave in the wizarding world, not just with wands, but with choices that broke the deepest rules she once lived by.